They first saw it just after dawn, moving slowly through the smoke and broken palm trees, its engine coughing like something old and weak, its small size almost insulting against the wide beach of Betio Island. Some of the Japanese Marines laughed, others pointed, a few shook their heads. To them it looked like a child's toy, a metal box on tracks, rolling straight into the most heavily defended island they had ever built. What none of them knew at that exact moment on November 20th, 1943, was that this toy tank was about to erase months of preparation, crush concrete bunkers thought to be indestructible, and break the last defensive line of the Imperial Japanese Navy's elite troops at Tarawa. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. The Battle of Tarawa began at 8:30 in the morning under a burning Pacific sun, on an island so small you could walk across it in less than an hour. Betio Island was only about 2,900 yards long and 800 yards wide, but it was one of the most heavily fortified pieces of land in the entire Pacific. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, commander of the Japanese garrison, had once said that it would take 1,000,000 men and 100 years to take Tarawa. He believed that fully. His men believed it too. They had dug into coral rock, poured reinforced concrete, positioned naval guns, and memorized every inch of the beach. And now, as the first American tanks crawled toward them, it seemed almost funny. The tank they were laughing at was the M4 Sherman, specifically the early M4A2 model used by the United States Marine Corps. Compared to the massive naval guns on Betio, or even the Japanese Type 95 Hago tanks, the Sherman looked unimpressive from a distance. It sat low, its turret did not look huge, its tracks were narrow. To a defender behind thick concrete walls, it looked harmless. But the laughter did not last long, because war has a way of turning small details into deadly surprises. The Marines of the 2nd Marine Division had trained for months for this assault. They knew Tarawa would be hard. They knew the reefs would be a problem. What they did not fully understand was how bad the tide would be. When the landing craft hit the reef, hundreds of yards from shore, the Marines had to climb out and wade forward under machine gun fire. Men were cut down in the water, equipment sank, radios failed. Officers died within minutes. By mid-morning, the beach was covered in bodies, smashed landing craft, and burning supplies. It looked like a disaster unfolding in slow motion. That was when the tanks mattered. The M4 Sherman tanks assigned to the assault were part of Company C 2nd Tank Battalion. They were launched from landing craft under fire, some sinking immediately into deep water. Others made it to the reef and stalled. But a handful reached the beach. When they did, everything changed. The Japanese defenders had planned for infantry assaults. They had planned for naval bombardment. They had not planned for tanks moving directly along the beach, firing point-blank into their strongest positions. One of those tanks was commanded by Lieutenant Edward J. Bale, Jr., a calm and methodical officer who had trained his crew well. His Sherman rolled forward despite heavy fire, its engine roaring loud enough to be heard over the explosions. Japanese machine guns rattled against its armour. Rifle bullets bounced off like rain. Inside the tank, the crew could hear the impacts, feel the vibrations, but they kept moving. The first bunker they approached was a reinforced concrete pillbox near the western end of the beach. It had survived hours of naval shelling. It had killed dozens of Marines already. The Japanese inside were confident. They had thick walls, overlapping fields of fire, and ammunition stacked to the ceiling. When the Sherman stopped just yards away, the bunker crew likely felt a moment of confusion. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The tank's 75mm gun fired once. The shell hit the pillbox at point blank range. Concrete shattered. Dust and smoke filled the air. A second shot followed almost immediately. The bunker went silent. Marines nearby stared in disbelief. A position that had held them down for hours was gone in seconds. Word spread fast along the beach. The tanks were working. As more Shermans pushed inland, the Japanese Marines began to understand their mistake. These were not toys. These were mobile bunkers with guns powerful enough to destroy anything on the island. And unlike naval shells, they could aim. They could adjust. They could keep firing until the target was gone. The Japanese tried everything to stop them. Soldiers armed with magnetic mines rushed forward, only to be cut down by machine gun fire. Others tried to climb onto the tanks, throwing grenades at the turrets. Some succeeded in damaging tracks or optics. But every tank that fell bought time for another to move forward, and every metre the tanks advanced weakened the Japanese defensive line. By the afternoon of November 20th, the fighting had moved off the beach and into the centre of Betio. This was where the Japanese defences were strongest. Trenches connected bunkers. Snipers hid in palm trees. Mortars dropped shells with deadly accuracy. It was close, brutal combat. But the tanks kept moving, crushing trench lines under their tracks, firing into openings and acting as rally points for the infantry. One Sherman, known later by Marines simply as China Gal, became famous for pushing deeper than any other tank on the first day. It rolled through the main airstrip, firing continuously, sometimes guided by infantry officers running beside it. Japanese defenders who had laughed in the morning now focused all their fire on these machines. They knew that if the tanks survived, the island would fall. What made the Sherman so deadly on Tarawa was not just its gun, but how it worked with the infantry. Marines learned quickly to move close to the tanks, using them as moving cover. Tank commanders opened their hatches to communicate by hand signals. Infantrymen pointed out firing ports and hidden bunkers. This teamwork, learned in blood and chaos, allowed small groups of Marines to break defences that had stopped entire companies earlier that day. Rear Admiral Shibasaki was killed that day, likely by naval gunfire or tank-supported infantry sometime in the afternoon of November 20th. His death marked the beginning of the end. Without centralised command, Japanese resistance became scattered, but no less fierce. Small groups fought from isolated bunkers, refusing to surrender. Some charged at night. Others waited silently until Marines passed, then opened fire from behind. The tanks became critical again, sealing off pockets of resistance and destroying them one by one. Night fell on Tarawa, with fires burning across the island. The sound of engines echoed in the darkness as tanks repositioned, their crews exhausted, dehydrated, and nearly deaf from constant noise. Inside the steel hulls, men slept in short bursts, knowing that at any moment a mine or grenade could end everything. The Japanese launched small counterattacks after midnight, but the tanks, firing flares and machine guns, helped break them apart. On November 21st, the second day of the battle, the remaining Shermans pushed toward the eastern end of Betio. Many were damaged. Some had thrown tracks. Others had jammed turrets or overheated engines. But they kept moving when they could, even being repaired under fire by tank crews and marine engineers. The Japanese defences were thinner now, but still deadly. Each bunker had to be destroyed individually, often with tanks firing at ranges of less than 10 yards. By November 22nd, after 76 hours of non-stop combat, the Battle of Tarawa was effectively over. Out of nearly 4,800 Japanese defenders, only 17 were captured alive. The rest were dead. The Americans paid a terrible price too, with over 1,000 Marines killed and more than 2,000 wounded. It was one of the bloodiest battles per square mile in Marine Corps history, and the shock of those losses echoed back home in the United States. When reporters and photographers arrived after the fighting, they captured images that stunned the public. Destroyed bunkers, burned out tanks, rows of bodies along the beach. For many Americans, Tarawa was the first time they truly saw what the Pacific War looked like. Military planners studied every detail of the battle, especially the role of armour, tides and coordination between land and sea forces. When the survivors walked the island afterward, they saw the results clearly. concrete bunkers crushed by tank fire, trenches flattened by steel tracks, gun positions smashed from angles the Japanese had never expected. The toy tanks had done exactly what they were designed to do. They had broken the strongest points, protected the infantry, and turned a near disaster into a hard-won victory. The lesson of Tarawa echoed across the Pacific. Tanks were no longer optional, they were essential. Landing plans were rewritten. Better intelligence on tides became standard. Amphibious tractors were improved. At Saipan, Tinian, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, American planners made sure armour landed early and in force, supported closely by infantry trained to fight beside steel. The Japanese too learned from Tarawa, but they lacked the resources to respond in the same way. Their remaining island defences grew deeper and more hidden, but without enough heavy weapons to stop tanks once they broke through. The laughter that greeted the Sherman tanks on Betio never happened again. And somewhere on that narrow strip of coral in November 1943, the meaning of modern amphibious warfare was rewritten. The moment Japanese Marines laughed at a toy tank became the moment their last line truly began to collapse. Steel rolled forward, concrete fell apart, and history moved on, leaving behind a lesson written in smoke, fire, and crushed coral that would shape every Pacific battle that followed. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.